Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Philip Frangoulis. I'm Senior Vice President responsible for research in S&P Global Commodity Insights. And I am very pleased to have Joe Dominguez, President and CEO of Constellation Energy with me. Constellation, the leading generator of nuclear power in the United States with 21 gigawatts, 21 reactors at 12 sites. Announced an acquisition which will make them the largest generator in the US, particularly of carbon-free power, but also with a lot of gas, geothermal, and quite a large presence. So Joe, we've heard the talk this year, the word this year is hyperscalers and two words, data centers. Every year we have a theme word. Those are the words this year. One of the questions is, will the grid be able to handle the growth? We heard yesterday that over the last 20 years, roughly 9% growth in total. But now we're looking at 55% growth over the next 20 years. It's not all from data centers. A lot of it is just from electrification. Can the industry handle it? Grid and generation.
Oh, look, I think so. I probably think about this in time buckets, but I think in reality the conversation has been hyperscaler plus load growth equals panic, if I was going to try to put this in a mathematical equation. And we don't see that really necessarily being the case. Look, we had a lot of conversations with different hyperscalers. And as a general rule, as much as we all were caught flat-footed by AI, to a certain extent, they were just slightly ahead of it. So the energy procurement folks within these organizations had plans for the next 5 years, and those plans were increased pretty dramatically by AI, but it was range-bound. And I think what happened was a lot of the CEOs said, go find us a bunch of excess power. And so literally every opportunity around the country was hit. And so it's not uncharacteristic for us to see the same data center idea pop up in multiple jurisdictions. Now, the individual utilities involved wouldn't necessarily understand that they were competing with, 5 other sites. Mm-hmm. So they all looked at it, and I think there's so many multiple counts of the amount of demand growth. Now, is it going to be substantial? Yes. But I actually think in the short term, we're going to be able to do this quite effectively.
And what are the hyperscalers? Since you've been talking to them, it's been very active in PJM. What are they looking for?
Well, I think, first of all, speed. I think the most important thing for them is to be able to meet their plans. They've bought these chips that are incredibly expensive. You know, we tend to translate things, just to make it easier in our jargon, into dollars per megawatt hour. For an entire facility, it's about $1,600 per megawatt hour in costs. About 800 of that is the chips. Energy is about 7 or 8 or 9% of their total cost. But they don't want that 7, 8, or 9% to be the blocker for them to be able to actually utilize the chips, because the chips, as powerful as they are, they're not state-of-the-art forever. So they have a 5 or 6 year depreciation schedule, and afterwards they need to be replaced with newer, more modern chips to maintain that competitive advantage. So their most important thing is certainty and speed. They want to get up and running quickly. They don't want to lose a second of time that they own that chip where it's not working and doing the things they need it to do.
And do they want power inside the fence or outside the fence?
I think they will do either, provided that speed is met. I think obviously they also have environmental commitments, so proximity to 24/7 clean energy is something that they would strongly prefer.
Okay. It seems that some utilities, even though they seem very happy about the increased demand, right? Big change, we've also seen some news about maybe some punitive rates that maybe some are considering to punish because of the cost of adding the hyperscalers. Is there a bit of schizophrenia, or how do you read that?
I don't know if I'd use that adjective, but that might be a different mental condition. But it is definitely the case that as in any market, supply and demand has an impact on underlying energy prices. And to the extent that what we're seeing here is really a requirement to build new generation or new forms of supply of whatever kind, there's a tendency in vertically integrated states to say, let's visit all of those costs on the cost causer. And that's quite different. That's very different from the history of our business where new customers on a system don't bear the entire cost of the infrastructure needed to serve them. But we are seeing that.
So with the added costs and with the build-out, do you have any concerns about prices, retail prices?
I think we're seeing an uptick in capacity prices as the system becomes tighter. But as a general rule, what we're seeing in terms of overall energy prices, we're still not at levels that nominally, not adjusted for inflation, than we observed in 2008 and 2009. So in the wholesale markets in which we operated, I was doing in 2007 24/7 deals for nuclear that were priced at around $53, $54. That's significantly higher than the market is today, even with this additional load. The main difference, though, is that the wires charges in that intervening period have gone up fairly substantially. I think it's well understood that the utilities use this drop in underlying power prices as an opportunity to do things to the system to improve the quality of the delivery service, address reliability issues. So as we visit the world today, we're seeing the same energy prices, but on top of that, the delivery charges and transmission charges are considerably north of where they were before, and that is creating some pressure on customer bills. So
to accommodate this growth, what kind of generation do you think will add over time?
Well, look, let's kind of go to the underlying facts. About 80% of the time, a third of the generation, not just in PJM that I'm familiar with, but pick your ISO, pick your region, is sitting on the sidelines, not being operated. And that's because we have a really peakish system. Most of the time, we don't use nearly all of its capacity. That means we could add data centers for most hours, and they're going to have a de minimis impact on the grid. In fact, arguably a beneficial impact because they will help to support the wires that have been built and the infrastructure that's been built. But we do have, and we're approaching peak hour issues. One interesting study that I commend to everybody's reading, I think was done by Duke University and released in the past few weeks, is the use of curtailment, or what we would call in the business demand response, as a means of creating some flexibility around the peak. And we used to see quite a bit of that. As much as 1% of the system supply in PJM had been demand response, customers willing to curtail when prices were high. And the fascinating piece about the Duke study is that even if we only get 0.5% of customers, 0.5% of customers doing that, we would liberate on the grid the ability to interconnect 71 gigawatts of new power resources, an astonishing amount. You just talked about our fleet being one of the largest it is at over 20 gigawatts, but the equivalent of 3/4 of the nation's nuclear capacity, right? If we're 25%, a full 75%, imagine that being just fully liberated for use for data centers just by getting people to curtail on peak hours. Now, there'll be a point where that resource is exhausted. Mm-hmm. But one of the reasons felt that I think this problem is easily solved in the first instance is we do have some slack in the system. We're not optimally using the system, so we have some ability to use that. And we have the ability to get customers to curtail as they have historically, and we'd actually increase the number of megawatts. So I've got this a little bit upside down from other speakers you might have been hearing. You probably hear throughout the conference this kind of panic. I don't feel it. I'm seeing the pace slow down in the sense that the hyperscalers are rationalizing their needs. I think we have system slack. I actually think, and I know this is a bit counterintuitive, but I think the question is really going to be, what do we do if we think about this in, call it 5-year chunks? What do we do in years 6 through 10 and 11 through 16, right? I mean, what are we going to plan from a resource standpoint? Because there, I think it's critically important that we plant the seeds today for the technologies we're going to need in the future.
So that's a good segue. Nuclear seems to be having a bit of a renaissance. Last year, we had CEO of Southern talked about Vogtle had just opened. What do you see in the future for nuclear right now? Are we having a renaissance? Will we see new construction?
You know, Renaissance is like a taboo world in our business, but yeah, I think there's a renewed interest. Other countries are doing it. I think we have to select designs that are very repeatable. Otherwise, we're going to be back in the circumstance we were during the first build-out, where we're building a bunch of custom homes as opposed to a bunch of track homes. If we get the design customized and we rinse and repeat, there's no reason why nuclear shouldn't be one of the technologies that we will use in that period, 15 years, 10, 15 years down the road. But we have to do the right things today. Likewise, carbon sequestration, I think there's a there on that. Again, regionally, it's going to depend on geologic formations. Renewables with storage solutions, better storage solutions are going to play a role here, but it's going to be all of the above. But I saw this paper the other day that just struck me, and I don't know if it's right. It was about climate. And as we know, the world's temperature has fluctuated wildly over the history of the planet. The last time it moved 6 degrees Celsius in a span of time began in 22,000 BC. That is to say that it took from 22,000 BC to today, roughly 24,000 years, for the planet to warm 6 degrees Celsius. And scientists could pretty much predict this through carbon and other methodologies that they use. If the models are to be believed, and I understand this is quite a contentious issue these days, but we could see a 6 degrees Celsius movement in the next 60 years. What happened in 24,000 years is, based on some of the science at least, indicating we'll see that in the next 6 decades. So that causes me to think about this, and the reason I think that it gets harder to plan for the future. We may believe, and I believe, that gas is going to be a fundamental part of our future. But I don't think the fact that we've put climate on the shelf, and arguably should be on the shelf given the imperatives of saving the country and leading economically and from a security standpoint with AI, and I do believe Secretary is right that we lead best when we're strongest. But we're going to have to address that issue. And we can't ignore it, because if you were just to transport your brain 10 years into the future, if any of these models are remotely accurate, what we're seeing is an asymmetrical shape to the temperature curve that causes us to believe that human impacts from climate are going to be far more severe 10 years from now than the travel we saw in the past 10 years, and so on and so forth. And so when we're thinking about powering AI in the future, I think carbon is going to return as one of the imperatives. And that's why I think fundamentally this is a nation that has to explore all opportunities: SMRs, large reactors from nuclear, carbon sequestration, the use of renewables, and better storage so we address reliability. But that to me is a reality more than the idea that we're going to have this unfettered use of fossil fuels for the next 20 or 30 years. It doesn't seem likely to me.
Do you think, will it be both SMRs and traditional large nuclear combination?
I think the jury's still out on that. Okay. I think probably the best thing we could have done and should have done is after Southern had completed Vogtle, is to use that workforce and the learnings and quickly move on to the next units. But we all know the story there. There, a bankruptcy in the middle of that, COVID, massive delays. But notwithstanding all of those things, and I don't think we'll repeat those things. The reality was the second reactor at Vogtle that they built was 20% cheaper, and there's no reason to believe that that trajectory of cost savings wouldn't have continued. And all told, it still clocked in at a price of roughly $150 a megawatt hour, equivalent to what New York selected as its offshore wind solutions for a resource that's quite a bit more reliable. So we tend to think about that experiment with the AP1000s and say, oh, that was a disaster. But I really think we have to go back and relook at the facts there. It was a disaster in the sense of the length of time and the fact that it was way over budget, but the outcome was not.
So you mentioned skilled labor to construct.
Yep.
How are you doing? Are you finding what you need today?
It's tough. I think it's tough sledding for everyone because the same drivers for AI, the need for electricians, the need for all sorts of support services, the technologies underlying, whether they be transformers or wires or whatnot, all of those things are in short supply today. And that's leading to some of the cost issues that we've been hearing about.
So let's change gears. Why buy Calpine now?
Because we looked at ourselves in the mirror. We were doing great as the largest publicly traded nuclear company in the world. But we had a number of conversations with hyperscalers, and we said, look, if we're going to try to be one of the companies that they pick up the phone and call first for solutions, we needed a nationwide presence, and we needed to be realistic that we weren't going to be able to do this on nuclear alone. But it was fundamentally important to us that Calpine was also leading in terms of research on sequestration, which I think is quite exciting. And we did a lot of diligence on that. So we saw that they're a fleet that was already well-positioned, already built, trading at a small fraction, frankly, of what we thought new build costs would be, in a world where our customers needed power now, and we weren't able to do that, quite honestly, with the fleet we had. But with the combined capabilities, we serve 75% of the Fortune 100. It's seldom the case that a client walks through the door and says, I want 100% of the power from nuclear energy, right? They have some sort of load shape that they want to match. They have some sort of sustainability goal. They want to have price certainty on a piece of it. But we'll use a combination of products out there. So we're often out there buying gas fired gen just to serve our customer load. It's far more efficient to have that and the capabilities.
And I think you already said that you see similar culture with Calpine, so it should be a good fit?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing when you're entering into any relationship like this is who your partner is. What their ethos is, what their vision is. They had a very strong vision around addressing climate, around reliability, around customer service, the innovation that they would provide. I mean, it's a fantastic team, and anyone who's dealt with Calpine knows that. And they'd kicked our ass a lot, pardon my language, but they had whooped us a lot as we competed with them. And sometimes we whooped them too. But they were good people and strong competitors, and I'm going to love having them as part of our team.
Going back to AI and data centers, are you starting to see any deployment of AI in your operations?
Sure, yeah. I mean, one of the cool things we did is we have on the Susquehanna River, we have a nuclear plant, a pump storage station, and a dam that actually creates the reservoir. It's Conowingo, Peach Bottom, and Muddy Run. It's an interesting combination of assets, right? The dam, kind of how much you release through it, sets up for how much pump storage you could have at any given time. There are thermal issues, you got to predict the rain and all of that. So how do you maximize the utilization of these three resources that maximizes the value for customers? And we were, through the adoption of AI, able to deliver $35 million of more electricity value to the region just by having AI plan for rainfall, tell us how much water we should release for the dam, constantly measure temperature and energy prices and all of that. So that's one small example, but we're going to do that in our customer business. Look, I don't think any company in this space that is not thinking about AI is not going to be around on this stage 10 years from now. Just not going to happen. The other thing, demand response, curtailment, the things we're talking about, very labor intensive, very data intensive. How do you manage 100, 200 customers who have to curtail at exactly the right moment? Turns out AI and AI tools are a wonderful part of that strategy.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk showing how energy and AI coming together, what a benefit it could be.
We're seeing it. I mean, we talk a lot about these longer-term longitudinal benefits. We're going to cure cancer and all of that stuff. That's all great, but we need to solve today's problem, and we need to demonstrate the utilization of this technology to make us better now.
So it really does feel like we might have reached a point where the image of nuclear has flipped and gone over the tipping point a bit. Would you agree?
Oh, I definitely agree. But we're in a business where we earn our reputation and earn this particular and very unique public trust every single day. And if we keep doing that, the results are going to be good.
That's great. Well, we've run out of time, but I have to say, you've calmed me down, Joe. I hope the audience, we've heard a little bit of panic around AI maybe breaking the grid. We didn't hear that. So please join me in thanking Joe and wishing him best of luck with his merger. Thanks, Joe.
May we have your attention, please?